On January 14th, 2020, a 52-year-old Illinois farmer named Earl Braddock walked into the showroom at Prairie Implement in Gibson City at 9:15 in the morning to look at a tractor he had no intention of buying. He had driven past the dealership the day before and seen it through the plate glass window, a brand new 2020 John Deere 8R410, forest green and highway yellow, 410 horsepower, sitting on the showroom floor under halogen spotlights, with its massive dual rear tires freshly dressed and its cab glass so clean it looked like open air. The sticker on the windshield read $339,800. With tax, delivery, the AutoTrack activation package, and the Starfire 6000 receiver, the out-the-door price was $341,200. Earl's primary field tractor was a 2003 John Deere 842-0 with 7,200 hours on the engine and a list of problems that was growing faster than the corn. The transmission was slipping between 7th and 8th gear. The right rear hydraulic remote had lost pressure and was weeping fluid onto the drawbar. The air conditioning had quit in July, and Earl had finished harvest with the cab door propped open and a box fan zip-tied to the buddy seat bracket. The 8420 owed him nothing. He had bought it used in 2008 for $91,000 with 4,100 hours, and it had given him 12 good years. But 12 years was enough. The 8420 was tired. Earl could hear it in the way the turbo hesitated at load, the way the hydraulic pump whined at high RPM, the way the transmission hunted between gears on the headlands like it couldn't decide where it belonged anymore. He walked into Prairie Implement to look. Just look. Craig Winslow met him at the showroom door before Earl's boots hit the tile. "Earl, I saw you slow down yesterday." Craig smiled the kind of smile that starts at a sales training seminar and never quite reaches the eyes. He had his iPad in the green rubberized case tucked under one arm and his name badge catching the halogen light. "Come take a look. I've got something that'll change the way you think about your operation." Earl didn't respond. He walked to the 8R410 and stood beside the left rear tire, which came up to his shoulder. He looked at the cab, the hood, the hitch. He ran his hand along the sheet metal the way a man runs his hand along a horse's flank. Not for show, but to feel what's underneath. Craig was already talking. He talked the way all dealership sales managers talk, in a continuous stream of features and numbers and financing scenarios that sounded like math but felt like weather, something happening around you that you couldn't stop. The 8R410 is the flagship of the row crop platform, 410 engine horsepower, IVT transmission, infinitely variable, no gears to shift, no clutch to burn, integrated AutoTrack guidance, Starfire 6000 GPS, full JD-Link connectivity so we can monitor your machine remotely from right here in the shop, section control on the planner, variable rate prescription maps, yield data upload, the whole precision ag ecosystem Earl right in the cab. "What's it cost to run?" Craig blinked. Salesmen don't like that question first. They like the horsepower question first, or the financing question, or the trade-in question. The cost to run question is the one they save for last, after the customer is already sitting in the cab, imagining himself in the field. "Well, that's where the story gets good," Craig said, recovering. He swiped his iPad to a spreadsheet he had clearly prepared for exactly this conversation. Based on your operation, 640 acres, corn bean rotation, current fuel and input costs, the 8R410's efficiency gains in fuel economy, reduced overlap from AutoTrack, and section control savings on seed and chemical will generate approximately $68,000 per year in net operational savings over your 8420. At that rate, this tractor pays for itself in 5 harvests, 5 harvests, 5 harvests, and that's conservative. Some of our operators are seeing north of $75,000 in year 1 savings alone. If you value stories about the equipment decisions that define a farm, the ones made in quiet, carried for decades, and never forgotten, this channel tells them. We don't rush. We don't sell. We just remember. Earl looked at the spreadsheet on the iPad. The numbers were clean and confident. They accounted for fuel savings, seed savings, chemical savings, labor efficiency, and reduced downtime. What they did not account for, what Craig Winslow either did not know or did not mention, was the cost of keeping the technology running. The Service Advisor subscription, $4,500 per year, required for any diagnostic work beyond checking the oil. The JDL-Link connectivity fee, $1,200 per year. The annual software update for the AutoTrack and section control systems, $2,800 per dealer visit, and the updates were mandatory. Skip 1 and the GPS accuracy degraded, and the warranty coverage lapsed. The integrated hydraulic diagnostic module that could only be serviced at the dealership because the firmware was encrypted, $185 per hour for shop labor. The replacement cost of a single Gen 4 display unit when the touchscreen failed, which they did on average every 3 to 4 years, $7,200 installed. Craig's spreadsheet showed the savings. It did not show the subscriptions, the fees, the mandatory updates, or the captive service costs. It showed what the tractor could earn. It did not show what the tractor would demand. Earl bought it anyway, not because he believed the 5 harvest number, because he needed a tractor, and this was the one Prairie Implement had on the floor, and he didn't have time to wait for a used 8R to come through auction. He traded the 8420 for $32,000, less than he expected, but Craig explained that the transmission slip knocked $12,000 off the book value. Earl financed the balance of $309,200 through Deere Financial at 4.9% over 7 years. Monthly payment, $4,387. He signed the papers at Craig's desk in the glass-walled office, while 2 other salesmen watched through the partition and grinned at each other. A $340,000 sale on a Tuesday morning in January. Craig would hit his quarterly bonus 3 months early. The 8R410 arrived at Earl's farm on February 3rd. It was everything Craig said it was, and everything he didn't say. The horsepower was real. The IVT transmission was as smooth as water over stone. The AutoTrack held the line within an inch across a half-mile pass. The cab was quiet enough to hear yourself think for the first time in 40 years of farming. Earl planted his 2020 corn crop in 4 days instead of 7. The fuel burn was 18% lower than the 8420. The section control saved him an estimated $9,000 in seed overlap on the corn planter alone. But the bills came with the savings. In March, the JDL-Link connectivity module threw a fault code, J1939, CAN bus communication error. a software glitch that disabled the auto-track guidance mid-pass. Earl called Prairie Implement. Craig transferred him to the service department. The service writer told him to bring the tractor in. Earl asked if he could reset the module himself. The service writer laughed. Not a mean laugh, but the resigned laugh of a man who has had this conversation 400 times. The J1939 bus is encrypted. Mr. Braddock, you need service advisor to clear the fault. We can get you in Thursday. Thursday, 3 days, without auto-track, in the middle of Springfield Prep. Earl drove the 8R410 to Prairie Implement on Thursday morning. The technician plugged in the service advisor laptop, cleared the fault code in 11 minutes, and handed Earl a bill for $420. $185 for the shop hour, and $235 for the diagnostic session. 11 minutes. $420. For a software glitch that Earl could have cleared himself with a $5 OBD cable if the firmware weren't locked. Earl paid the bill. He didn't argue. He folded the receipt and put it in his chest pocket and drove home. In August, the Gen 4 display froze during harvest. The touchscreen went black at 2 in the afternoon with the combine running alongside and the grain cart half full. Earl cycled the power. Nothing. He pulled the fuse and reset it. Nothing. He called the dealer. The service writer said the earliest opening was the following Monday. Earl lost 4 days of harvest, waiting for a technician to drive out, pull the display unit, reflash the firmware, and reinstall it. The bill was $1,140. The lost harvest time, 4 days, at an estimated $6,200 per day in crop value at risk, was Earl's problem, not the dealer's. By the end of the first year, Earl sat at his kitchen table with Ruth and laid out every receipt from the 8R410. The tractor payment, $52,644 for the year. The fuel and operating costs, $28,000. The efficiency savings Craig had promised, approximately $61,000, close to the $68,000 Craig had projected, Earl had to admit. But the technology costs Craig had never mentioned. Service advisor subscription, $4,500. JDL Inc. fee, $1,200. Software update, $2,800. 2 diagnostic visits, $1,560. Display reflash, $1,140. Total hidden technology costs in year 1, $11,200. The net savings were not $68,000. They were $49,800. At that rate, the 8R410 would not pay for itself in 5 harvests. It would take 7, maybe 8. And that was assuming the technology costs didn't increase, which they would, because they always did. Earl didn't call Craig. He didn't go back to the dealership to complain. He didn't write a letter or post on an internet forum or tell the story at the elevator. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the numbers and thought about what his father would have done. Harold Braddock had never owned a tractor with a touchscreen. He had never paid a subscription fee to diagnose his own equipment. He had never waited 4 days for a technician to drive out and press a button on a laptop to make his tractor work again. Harold fixed what he could fix and paid for what he couldn't, and never gave anyone the power to stand between him and his work. Earl found Gene Hofstetter through Tom Lindquist. Tom had written Gene's name in his spiral notebook 3 years earlier when a young farmer in Sibley mentioned that a former Deere engineer was doing independent diagnostics out of a garage in Farmer City. Earl drove to Gene's shop on a Saturday morning in January of 2021. The garage was a converted two-car, attached to a ranch house on a half-acre lot. A white Chevy Express van with a magnetic sign sat in the driveway. Inside, the walls were lined with oscilloscopes, multimeters, CAN bus analyzers, and a rack of aftermarket diagnostic interfaces that could read every fault code John Deere had ever written. Gene Hofstetter was 44 years old, compact, 5'9", dark brown beard trimmed close, round wire rim glasses. He had spent 8 years as an embedded systems engineer at John Deere's Waterloo Electronics division before he left in 2016. He left because Deere was encrypting the diagnostic firmware on every new platform, not to protect the farmer, but to protect the dealer service revenue. Gene had argued against it in 3 internal meetings and been told each time that the decision was above his pay grade. He turned in his badge on a Friday afternoon and opened the garage the following Monday. "What do you need?" Gene asked. "I need to be able to clear my own fault codes," Earl said. "And I need someone who won't charge me $400 for 11 minutes. Gene charged $85 an hour. He drove to Earl's farm in the white van, plugged in his aftermarket diagnostic interface, and mapped every module on the 8R410's CAN bus in 45 minutes. He showed Earl how to identify the 6 most common fault codes, the ones the dealer charged a shop visit to clear, and installed a monitoring dongle on the J1939 bus that would alert Earl's phone when a fault appeared. Total cost, $320 for the visit and the dongle, the equivalent of 1 diagnostic appointment at Prairie Implement. In the second year, Earl's technology costs dropped from $11,200 to $3,100. Gene's annual checkup at $425, a software calibration at $380, and the JDL Link fee Earl couldn't avoid because it was baked into the Deere financial loan agreement. The savings were now $57,900 per year instead of $49,800. The payoff timeline shortened from 8 years to 6. By the 3rd year, something had shifted. Earl wasn't just saving money. He was learning the machine in a way Craig Winslow's spreadsheet had never imagined, and John Deere's encrypted firmware had been specifically designed to prevent. He had taught himself to read the CAN bus data on his phone, the way his father had taught himself to read oil pressure on a mechanical gauge. Not with a manual, but with attention. He could tell by the data stream when the hydraulic filter was loading up, when the turbo wastegate was sticking, when the transmission oil temperature was running 3 degrees hot, because the cooler fins were packed with chaff. He serviced what he could himself and called Gene for the rest. He never called Prairie Implement again, Craig Winslow noticed. Not because Earl complained. Earl never complained. But because Earl stopped coming in. No service appointments, no parts counter visits, no diagnostic sessions. The 8R410 had been one of Prairie Implement's best service revenue generators, a $340,000 machine that needed the dealer for everything. And now it was generating nothing. Craig called Earl's cell phone in the spring of 2022 and left a message about a complimentary multi-point inspection. Earl didn't call back. Word spread through the township the way it always did, not through advertisements or social media or dealer newsletters, but through Tom Lindquist's spiral notebook, through conversations at the elevator while waiting for the grain probe, through the silences at the parts counter when farmers stopped asking for prices and started asking for Gene Hofstetter's phone number instead. Tom wrote Gene's name and number on a page in his notebook and showed it to anyone who asked. He didn't have to explain what Gene did. The farmers already knew. They had all received the same diagnostic bills, the same subscription renewal notices, the same locked screens on their own machines. They just hadn't known there was someone who could unlock them. In 2022, Gene picked up 11 new farm clients from Ford and McLean counties. By 2023, the number was 19. He hired a part-time assistant, a 26-year-old electrical engineering graduate from the University of Illinois, who couldn't find work at Deere because Deere wasn't hiring engineers anymore. They were hiring software licensing specialists. Gene taught him the way Virgil Kemp taught people. Patiently, from the ground up, with a soldering iron in one hand and a service manual in the other. Prairie Implement Service Department revenue dropped 14% in 2022 and another 11% in 2023. The service manager, Wayne Feltz, blamed supply chain issues. The district rep blamed the economy. The Deere regional office blamed market softness. Craig Winslow blamed nothing because Craig Winslow had been promoted to the general sales manager position at the Champaign store and was no longer at Prairie Implement to see the service bay parking lot get emptier every month. He had moved on to bigger commissions and newer spreadsheets. The farmers he left behind had moved on too, just in a different direction. In the fall of 2024, the 8R410 had 4,700 hours on it. The IVT transmission still shifted like water. The AutoTrack still held within an inch. The engine oil analysis, which Earl sent to a lab in Springfield every 500 hours, the same way his father had sent soil samples to the extension office every spring, came back clean every time. Copper within spec, iron within spec, silicon within spec. The 8R410 was by every measurable standard a machine in the prime of its working life, and it belonged to Earl in every way, except one. Earl made the final payment on the John Deere 8R410 that October. Not the 7th-year payment, the 57th monthly payment out of 84. He had paid extra principal every month starting in year 3. Once Gene had cut the technology overhead enough to free the cash flow. The loan was scheduled to run through January of 2027. Earl paid it off 26 months early. He drove to the Deere financial office in Bloomington and handed them a cashier's check for the remaining balance of $87,412. The clerk printed the lien release, and Earl folded it and put it in his chest pocket, the same pocket that still held the original receipt from the J1939 diagnostic visit 4 years and $420 ago. The 8R410 did not pay for itself in 5 harvests. Craig Winslow's spreadsheet was wrong, not because the savings weren't real, but because the costs he never mentioned ate into them like rust eats into unprimed steel. The tractor paid for itself in 4 years and 9 months, but only because Earl Braddock did what Earl Braddock always did. He found a way to own the machine instead of letting the machine own him. He cut the dealer out of the maintenance loop. He learned the technology instead of renting access to it. He treated the 8R410 the same way his father had treated the 4640 and the 4230. As iron that belonged to the man who paid for it, not the company that built it. Craig Winslow is the general sales manager at the Champaign store now. He has a corner office with a view of the lot and a leased BMW 3 Series in the reserved parking spot. He tells new customers that the 8R Series pays for itself in 5 harvests. He has the same spreadsheet on his iPad, updated with new model numbers and new price points, but the same math and the same omissions. He still doesn't include the subscription fees or the diagnostic costs or the mandatory software updates. He doesn't mention Gene Hofstetter because he has never heard of Gene Hofstetter, and that is the point. In the spring of 2026, the John Deere 8R410 sits in Earl Braddock's machine shed outside Gibson City with 3,100 hours on the engine. The paint still gleams under the overhead lights. The IVT transmission shifts like silk. The auto track holds the line within an inch. The Gen 4 display, the second one installed by Gene at Earl's kitchen table with a soldering iron and a firmware image from a backup server in Estonia, runs faster than the factory unit ever did. Nathan came home to the farm last year. The first thing Earl taught him was not the 8R's touchscreen or the GPS calibration or the section control mapping. The first thing Earl taught him was how to read the CAN bus data on the phone dongle, and what the fault codes meant, and when to call Gene, and when to fix it yourself. The tractor's the easy part, Earl told him. It's the people who stand between you and your own equipment that make it hard. Don't let anyone charge you for permission to fix what you already own. The 8R410 paid for itself. Not in 5 harvests like Craig promised, but it paid. And the difference between Craig's number and Earl's number, between the salesman's spreadsheet and the farmer's kitchen table, is the difference between selling a machine and owning one. $340,000, 4 years and 9 months, 3,100 hours, and the only subscription Earl Braddock pays now is the one to Gene Hofstetter. $85 an hour, paid in cash, no contract, no login, no encrypted firmware, standing between a farmer and his iron.